Hello and welcome back to Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. Thank you for joining me in this season of Stories That Shape Us. For this week, we're dealing with abuse. What is abuse? And so yesterday I talked about the difference between an abusive relationship or abusive marriage and a marriage that's just going through difficulties. What's the difference? It's really important that we're able to identify the difference because we need to learn how to give victims appropriate support. And I'm specifically speaking in the context of the Christian community. That's where I work most. Those are the women that I support. And oftentimes in this community, it's seemingly a fine line between abuse and a relationship that is just going through a difficult time. And some of the relationships go through a difficult time for a long time, and it's not abuse. But there's some relationships that are abuse, and a difficult relationship can be an abusive relationship, but an abusive relationship, a difficult relationship will be abusive, but not all difficult relationships are abusive, right? So today I'm talking about asking the right questions. What are the right questions to ask when somebody discloses abuse? What are some of those questions? So knowing the difference between abuse and difficulties require the listener to do two things really well. One, ask the right questions, and two, be able to sit with the truth. Because when you ask the right questions, you need to be able to sit with the truth. But what are those questions that you need to ask? What are the right questions to ask a woman who discloses abuse? So first, I just want to touch on what's the wrong question. Don't ask, what did you do? That's not one of the right questions to ask. Never ask a woman who discloses abuse, what did you do? What is your part? Why did you or why didn't you? Are you praying enough, or any one of those questions? Do not ask a woman who discloses abuse those questions. But you might want to ask, do you feel controlled and isolated? When a woman says she's or a victim of abuse, said, do you feel controlled and isolated? Have they threatened you or your family or your children or the pets? Any threats of harm? Have you been threatened? Have you ever been hit? So those are some right questions to ask when somebody discloses abuse. So if you are listening in a church capacity and somebody discloses abuse, then you can ask these questions. Also, if they don't disclose abuse, but they're sharing about the relationship, listen for patterns of control and isolation. Listen for patterns of threats where is this woman isolated from her family, from her friends, from a support system? Is she being prevented from seeking support? Is she being hit or threatened? You can sometimes hear it in the conversation if you listen well enough. You allow yourself to challenge your biases. You'll be able to hear it. And that takes me to the next place, that in order to be able to listen and to ask the right questions, you will need to challenge your unconscious bias. We all have biases. We all have judgments. We all make them. And so you will need to be able to learn how to challenge your unconscious bias around marriage, what God says about divorce, and the role of women in marriage. You may need to challenge some of those, especially if it's a woman that's disclosing abuse. You may need to challenge how you feel about that, because there's some people in the Christian community who feels like divorce is wrong. God hates divorce, they say. That's not what that meant, but God hates divorce. You mustn't. And so hearing a woman in the context, when you have those filters in already, you won't be able to hear the patterns of abuse and the patterns of manipulation and control and isolation and the threats, and you won't be able to hear it. Sometimes a man can put his wife down and insult her right there in everybody's midst, and nobody does anything about it because it's so normalized sometimes in culture, in church culture, in the family culture, that a man can harm his wife right in the midst of everybody, and nobody challenges it. Nobody says, are you okay? Nobody asks any questions. Nobody does anything. Also, some questions to ask is, what can I do? How can I support you? What do you need? For example, she might not have money. Sometimes the abuse is financial and he will not give her money for shopping, but he'll expect food. Now, I'm not saying you're going to take the responsibility of providing this woman with money every week, but depending on where you live, she might be able to apply for different resources, or you might be able to help her buy some necessary things that she might need for herself as a woman, if it's a woman, that she might not be able to afford because he doesn't give her money, because he withhold money from her and don't give her money to spend on things that is necessary for her as a woman. If she's leaving and wanting to escape, there might be money that's needed. So there are different ways that money is used as a means to manipulate and control. So she might need resources. She might need childcare so she can attend a doctor's appointment, because sometimes she's not allowed to go to the doctor. She might need advocacy. There might different things that she might need. And when you ask her, what do you need and how can I support you, really listen to what she says and see how you can support. Look for barriers. And this is not a question, but this is something I want to invite you to do if you're listening to women who are experiencing abuse. Look for barriers to the women accessing support. For example, language barrier or racism. According to Women's Aid, according to a survey done by Women's Aid, 46.2% of women in refugees spent between 2 to 10 years in an abusive relationship before leaving. And one of the studies that they did show that women who are from ethnic minority communities spend 20 years, up to 20 years before they start accessing support, before they start disclosing. So what I'm sharing is that, what I'm saying is that a woman is not usually the first port of call. By the time you hear it, she would have been suffering for a long time. And so there might be fear, there might be different types of barriers that she's experiencing. So you might need to, depending on who is disclosing ethnicity, you might want to ask questions around barriers for access. You might want to know, does she need an interpreter, or would she like you to accompany her? Sometimes the language of organizations can be difficult to understand. I know organizations such as Women's Aid do amazing work with women, and there are many more charities here in the UK that looks after women who experience abuse, but there's sometimes barriers to access. And so you might want to, when you ask how you can support, listen for some of those ways that you can support, where you can help women with some of the barriers that they have to access, and what would they need. When we think about the Christian community, Christian women usually comes to church first. And so I'm speaking to you if you're a church leader. I'm speaking to you if you're a pastor. I'm speaking to you if you run women's ministries or you're in any form of leadership. Learn how to listen and ask the right questions when a woman discloses abuse. I think we should learn how to look as well, because sometimes we can see things, but we dismiss it. We see things and it makes us uncomfortable, but we don't do anything about it because maybe it's the elder, or a famous couple, or this person is a teacher at church, or we feel like we can't touch that family. And so all victims need is somebody who is going to walk beside them and befriend them and be there, knowing that I have a safe place that I can go to. But we need to know, what are the questions that we need to ask? What are the right questions to ask when somebody discloses? Because the questioning, learning how to just listen and to go with what is being shared, really helps you to be able to help a victim and can make a massive difference in her life. If you're listening to this and you are struggling in an abusive relationship, I'm inviting you to reach out to Women's Aid here in the UK, or reach out to if you sometimes in Google, if you type domestic abuse services in your area, different services that are available and accessible will come up, and you can find some support. If you are in danger, I suggest that you call the police and they will direct you to appropriate support. They will put you in touch with appropriate support wherever you are. If you're in danger, ring the police. I'm going to put the numbers for women's aid in the description of this video. But please reach out for support. Just know that you're not alone, that you can get support, and that there are people who will believe you, listen to you, and support you and help you walk your journey of healing. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.